Oh dear, oh dear. If President Trump could have been said to have had a superpower, it was surely using the fact that the world had sold goods that Americans wanted to America and thus having made themselves vulnerable to its economy. And Trump was then able to wield tariffs against them. At the drop of a hat, boom, 25% tariffs against you. What, you're fighting back? Zap, have 50%, loser. Kapow, you didn't nominate me for the Peace Prize? Eat 50%, former ally. The unpredictability, the arbitrary nature of what figures were levied against which countries for which patently bullshit reason, which was then changed the next day. This, combined with the US currently being the most dynamic economy in the world, gave Trump immense negative power. Negative because it was a power you could only use to hurt, to then use that pain to extort things from people in return from stopping using it so much. The short-termists who wielded such power gloried in the revenues they were raising for the US government, having found a way to levy taxes against the American people without it being called or treated as a tax. And they were blind to, or careless towards, the damage it was doing to the US in the longer term, with the loss of trust and the many countries starting to come together to create alternatives to trading with the capricious beast. And then yesterday, a federal appeals court made the ruling that this superpower isn't a real thing. And that, if it sticks, is going to leave Trump with a whole lot of egg on his face and a massive and expensive logistical problem. Now, the basis for the legal challenge to Trump's tariffs is that constitutionally, the president is not given the right, as standard, to levy tariffs at all. That is a matter for Congress. And that kind of makes sense because normally such measures are the result of a deliberative, consultative process. Investigating the fine deal, hearing from affected parties, all the stuff of grown-up government, well, sort of grown-up. Certainly the stuff that Trump has no time for. It meant that Trump had to invoke bogus emergencies to seek to usurp that power for himself, to be used however he saw fit. Hence why, when he first slapped tariffs on Mexico and Canada, it was under the pretense that it was all about them allowing fentanyl to slosh over the border like a big old tsunami, even though barely any was actually coming over the northern border. Certainly not an emergency. And then Trump brought in so-called reciprocal tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And that was the device that really went on to do all the heavy lifting, with all the tariffs firing out in all directions like a toddler with a sugar rush and an unwisely powerful water pistol in hand. Splish, splosh, splash. Such fun. We had seen the US Court of International Trade initially ruling that Trump had exceeded his authority. You may recall the ruling went something like this. We are not addressing whether the president's actions should have been taken as a matter of policy, pointing out that even if it's a stupid policy, that's not a good enough reason for the courts to intervene. If it's a stupid policy that the president has within his remit, perhaps don't elect stupid people. The only issue we resolve on appeal is whether the trafficking tariffs and reciprocal tariffs imposed by the challenged executive orders are authorized by IEEPA. We conclude they are not. That, of course, went to appeal instantly, and the effect of the ruling was put on hold while it did so, and now the appeal court has come back with a message. We agree. Not authorized, hence not constitutional. And yes, once again, that is going to appeal instantly, and so it is going to come down to the Supreme Court. Let's just reflect for a few minutes on what it would and what it would not mean if a Supreme Court were actually to uphold the ruling. Firstly, Trump will be left looking immensely foolish. He has pretty much terrorized the world with his ability to arbitrarily swap in tariffs in just about any area he cares to for whatever reason he chooses. If it suddenly turns out that that was all beyond his powers, it leaves a hell of a mess. Those various deals that were done with numerous different countries, the majority of what they cover, general tariffs, Suddenly vows are open to question. Not only that, but all payments made so far against these unlawful tariffs, that would all have to be repaid. Just think about the logistics of that for a moment. Remember, the Trump administration has been boasting about the $150 billion and counting brought in already. All the companies, all the states, everyone that's paid out, well, they're going to be demanding that they get repaid. Trump's Justice Department acknowledged in legal briefs filed with the court that importers would be entitled to such refunds and says that it would be down to Customs and Border Protection to process them. Well, that's all very well, but trade experts suggest, and I would take it as a statement of the bleeding obvious, that that will be, quote, a logistical nightmare. Not least because the money would have to be paid back with interest. Bear in mind, end consumers, Americans who found that their prices had been raised because of tariffs, they will not get refunds. Trump, of course, took the ruling with all the good humour and equanimity that we've come to associate with him. Today, a highly partisan appeals court incorrectly said that our tariffs should be removed, but they know the United States of America will win in the end. If these tariffs ever went away, he continued, it would be a total disaster for the country. It would make us financially weak, and we have to be strong. Which, of course, is Trump's special way of saying, oops, I may have messed up. Sorry about that. So now it goes to the Supreme Court, and that means it's likely that it won't be until next year when we get a definitive answer. In the meantime, the tariffs are going to remain in effect, piling up more and more income. Only now, in the full knowledge that that could easily all end up being paid straight back again. Does this mean the complete end of the tariffs? And if so, what about all that income to the federal government that was going to offset some of the cost of the measures in Trump's spending bill that he was saying would bring the deficit down and all of that? Well, the answer is no. Trump still has a relatively uncontroversial power to enact tariffs on a sectoral basis. So his charges on aluminium and automobiles, those are not affected by this ruling. So if Trump wants to rebuild his suite of tariffs, he can sort of do it with a full range of sectoral tariffs levied against countries, maybe aiming to match the overall tariff burden that way. He can also apply tariffs to remedy trade practices deemed to be unfair, which he'd already used for some of the tariffs against China. But such tariffs brought under Section 301 of the 1974 Trade Act, they're supposed to be preceded by proper consultations and an investigation, which most surely take all the fun out of that instant trigger finger thing that he's got going on. But yes, tariffs can still be levied. It will be chaotic and complemented. All the refunds on the incorrectly levied charges would all still have to be made. But in principle, even though it would constrain the absolute freedom in which he can just randomly come up with new measures at the drop of a hat just to keep everyone off balance, in the longer term, it wouldn't prevent the United States, should that be the settled will of the country, using its tariffs to tax businesses and citizens as it has been doing. However, don't underestimate the short-term embarrassment, the short-term absolute chaos and disruption and cost. So Trump will be lobbying the Supreme Court very hard indeed to overturn the judgments made by the lower courts. And this is arguably going to be a key test for the Supreme Court, because by all accounts this is a pretty clear case, upheld as such by both prior courts. Numerous conservative lawyers and scholars have argued that Trump's reciprocal tariffs were illegal. There is no outstanding novel legal aspect to the case that makes it special in the face of prior precedent, except for the fact that Donald Trump really wants this. So it's hard to understate the fury that will come from Trump and the MAGA base if they don't back him up. But it would be a creative challenge for them to come up with a rationale that makes some sort of sense if they do decide to cave and to give him what he wants. After all, they will have to make it consistent with the fact that they themselves ruled former President Biden's plans for student debt forgiveness to be unconstitutional because he lacked the sanction of Congress. To do that, but then to say it's just peachy for Trump to single-handedly and abruptly completely upend America's trade and tariff policy, well, that's a tough argument to make. Arguably, if that's where they go in this case, it will be an indicator that there are no legal arguments so tenuous that they cannot rule in Trump's favour in the future, which would be a worrying message. The other question is whether such a ruling might wake Congress up to the idea that maybe, just maybe, it should reclaim its role of overseeing tariffs, otherwise known as doing your actual job. They clearly weren't minded to cross Trump on it while he was projecting all this strength, but if it turns out he can't implement the tariffs after all, then maybe, like wee timorous beasties, they might just emerge from the shadows. Ironically, Republicans in Congress have been so slavishly loyal so far to Trump that he almost certainly could have gotten them to vote his proposals through anyway. But of course, no, he was never going to do that. It would be too slow, too uncertain. Trump wanted to be like his Trump trading cards, shooting tariff laser beams from his eyes. So now we wait. And it will be interesting to see if this judgment, hanging in the air as it's going to for months now, will constrain Trump from the arbitrary nature of his almost daily announcements and threats. Boasting about how much money you're raking in will have a hollow ring, if everyone knows that that might just be tomorrow's massive refund headache. And for all of those countries that have been handed a world of pain over the last few months, at least they have some feelings of schadenfreude as they see the White House nervously contemplating the possible payback to come.